As you can see, I am not wearing green and there ain't nobody here to pinch me. So I'm absolutely safe in my spot here in the Denver Elections Division unless somebody comes barging through the door to pinch me. I want to acknowledge my co-chair of this committee, and that's Councilwoman Kendra Black. So the first thing on, and I'll pass it on to Kendra Black, is this is part of a series of our Ballot Access Modernization Committee. The members that you see here are members of the committee. This is a public meeting, so we want to make sure that folks can access on Facebook, and this will be something that be recorded, so you can chime in if you missed it or if you missed part of the conversation. Please feel free to access it and review it. We'll be talking about a number of different things that we want to do to improve and modernize access to the ballot. There's a lot of things that have warranted cleanup and review. It's been quite a while since we've updated them, so this is the whole purpose of this committee. I want to invite folks and let folks know that we do have a public comment period. That public comment period is 15 minutes at the end of the meeting. We do have a sign up for that public comment, and so far we don't have too many people signed up or anybody, but you'll have an opportunity to provide those comments, also written, right? So please send us written comments as well too. We invite you to know that we won't be answering comments live during the committee, because we want to really spend the time here on Zoom to be able to analyze a lot of these potential changes and some of the problems that we've encountered and some of the things that we'd like to resolve. So we want to be able to make sure that we have that ample time to be able to do that. Each speaker at the end will have a maximum of 3 minutes to deliver those comments. The comment period is limited to 15 minutes total, and the order will be determined on a first come, first served basis. So you could use the form that's being posted in the chat on today's meeting. If you have any other questions or any feedback, like I said, please email us at BAMC, so BAMC @denvergov.org. Okay, it's on our website as well too, denverclerkandrecorder.org. So I want to pass it over to Councilwoman Kendra Black for her part of the welcome.
Thank you. I do not have much to say, but welcome everyone. I forgot it was St. Patrick's Day, so unfortunately I'm wearing blue. But I look forward to the conversation. I haven't seen the presentation or the timeline, so I'm very excited to see all the hard work that the clerk's office did. So thank you. And that's all I'm going to say today. But I do think there are some people who are having problems signing into the meeting who might need to be promoted. If whoever is managing that could look into that, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Perfect. We will do that. So we're sharing the screen, if you can see that. I think everybody can see the screen. Yep. So this is our Ballot Access Modernization Committee. So what we're going to do is kind of review some of the recommendations from the last meeting. So going over title setting changes, municipal information booklet changes, and then kind of do that little recap. So the recap of our February 17th meeting, the members agreed to changes to the title setting process. These are changes that would include a staff draft at review and comment stage, public comment and final setting by myself, the clerk, in consultation with the city attorney's office. Also administrative / timeline changes to allow more time for production of the municipal information booklet, the MIB. Note that we're still actively seeking proposals for changes to the MIB process to better inform voters. We don't have a lot of so one of the things that was discussed at our last meeting is, and kind of the proposal is, we should have our municipal information booklet look like the blue book that the state puts out for its Tabor notices and everything else. But one thing that's very notable out of that is we don't have the Office of Legislative Affairs. We don't have that similar sign up. It's not an apples to apples comparison, and there's a lot there that really hinder our opportunity to really mirror it, but we're going to get as close as possible to revamp it and do it in a way that's acceptable, right? Staff agreed to produce some visual aids to make timeline issues clear, and we will propose that we will put those up today. So the first thing that we're going to do is look at ballot title setting, and just to kind of go over what you could expect for today's meeting, and folks, I mean, members of the committee, we do want to cover, some of those review of the recommendations of the last meeting, items identified for discussion today, and then we'll look at timeline and administrative issues, and then also, committee discussion on future agenda items, and we'll have that public comment period. So if we want to get into the nitty gritty here, ballot title setting. So possible solutions. The staff recommendation for the ballot title setting is to create a new process for title setting that includes initial draft of the title by the city attorney or designee and city council staff at the review and comment stage. The draft is delivered to the clerk for public comment period of a week. Clerk reviews and sets final title in consultation with the city attorney's office, and also appeals process to proper court. The method for this change is a charter amendment and a council ordinance. Now, part of that opportunity is looking at from start to finish. It's a complete review of that process. In comparison with other counties, it's very similar, right? Looking at the options for hearings and appeals processes, because we want to make sure that those exist in that realm and folks have that opportunity to do that. Ballot information book. I don't know if folks have any questions at that point, but that, please, raise your hand and then we can take them. Let's see, ballot information booklet. So the ballot information booklet and possible solutions to that ballot information booklet. And part of the problem with that ballot information booklet is there's really no ability or, for me as the clerk or for my office to be able to, kind of referee or editorialize or do anything like that with the ballot information booklet when it comes to competing issues. The proponents submit their side, and then anybody who's an opponent can actually submit their rebuttal. And we're not authorized to do any fact checking. We're authorized for length and content. You can't call somebody's mom out or anything like that in the middle of in the content or anything like that. It has to abide by very, very loose, let's just say, guidelines, right? So that's part of the problem. Think of it as what some of the critics of it is called as Facebook on paper, right? We don't want Facebook on paper. We want to be able to take a look at how this can continue to be helpful for Denver voters. The staff recommendations after review, one is closing the comment period for the MIB for the municipal information booklet, and at least 60 days versus 50 to allow for translation and printing. Remember, we are a Section 203 county, which means we have to print in Spanish. And so a lot of our materials go out in that second language, and we have to be able to do that. The second would be allowing the clerk to accept public comment on pro and con statements. So that's the one thing that would be beneficial in terms of fairness. And we would summarize that input and place it on the MIB. The other thing would be moving up timelines for Tabor notices for city council via ordinance. Right now, it's currently set at 43 days. For us, I mean, we'd like to be able to adhere to an earlier dates for that Tabor deadline so that we can get everything in a row. And what you'll see is a compilation of deadlines that we have to abide by, and we do very well. I could tell you right now, it is very messy in terms of all the different deadlines that we have to be in compliance with, but we get it done. So any kind of tinkering with elections law or timelines, really, it really has downstream effects, which you'll see later. So I definitely want to have some open discussion for any new ideas from the committee members on that. So I do see one hand up, Mr. Broadwell.
Could somebody explain a little more what the part of this number 3 means when it says Tabor notices for city council? I don't get it.
Yeah, so I want to point to, so we do have some of our subject matter experts on the call as well too. I don't know if Elections Director Dina Dawson or Audrey Klein, Director of Public Affairs, wanted to chime in on that as well too. Ms. Dina Dawson is our Director of Elections and kind of has to really coordinate all those different timelines in terms of what that translates for us. And team, feel free. And also I want to introduce Ben Schleier, who's also our compliance director, our compliance administrator. I just gave you a promotion in our office, as well as Sultan Dillard.
Clerk Audrey Klein is here. I can take that one. I believe it's actually supposed to be from City Council, and that's a typo on my end, so I apologize. But those are sort of the sort of very technical pieces that need to be addressed in the Tabor notices that are mailed out. So when the and I should really tag in Ben on this one because he's better at explaining it than I am. But that timeline is really tight, but it could be with some cooperation from council, it could give the administrators a little bit more time.
I'm happy, this is Dina. I'm happy to jump in there too, to hopefully provide a little bit more context. The 43 deadline is in statute, but what we were looking for is that currently there's a handshake agreement between us and City Council, where if they have an item that is going to appear in the Tabor notice, that's always been given to the elections division in a timely fashion, well in advance of the 43-day deadline. The 43-day deadline, that deadline for us, we're already doing our final version of the proofing of the Tabor notice so that we can get it translated. And then the other piece in statute is that we have to have that Tabor notice out to voters with that 30 days before the election. So if council was to abide by the 43-day deadline, which is provided in statute, it would be really putting us behind the gun. And so what we were looking for is some way to kind of solidify in an ordinance or a rule that we would get that information from council early enough to prepare the Tabor notices, which we also combine with the municipal information booklet. I hope, did that answer your question, Mr. Broadwell? No.
What information from council are you talking about?
If the initiated measure is a Tabor that has tax or debt, we get all of that information from the DEO, which is council, at that 43-day deadline. No, I'm not giving you what you're looking for. I can see.
No, I'm just confused. You maybe it's just me.
I think, well, part of it has to do with finance as well too, in terms of preparing some of the data as well. And I think, let me
drop it in the chat.
I see that Councilwoman Sawyer has her hand up, Councilman Black, and then Sky, Mr. Maybe you can help us clarify that on that end.
Yeah, happy to. It is finance that prepares that information and sends it over. So I think that's where the disconnect is. And I, to be honest, haven't looked at the code recently enough to say whether the code says council, but the information itself is actually prepared by the finance team and delivered by finance. There's not really a role for city council to develop and pass on that information. So that might also be something we just want to correct for, because it is very specific financial information that I don't think, in all fairness to city council, would be available to them without finance providing it.
That's correct. Councilman Black, Councilman Sandoval, Sawyer.
I just had a quick question about the timeline date. So if we're looking at 43 days, is that 43 days before the mailing date, Or is that, I guess there's, there are so many dates involved here. What I'm trying to kind of understand is 43 days from what exactly, just so that we know kind of as we're proposing a new timeline or clarifying in ordinance, we know very clearly what that drop dead date means.
I
Councilwoman,
believe-
that's an excellent question. I'm sorry, Clerk, I don't mean to step
No,
on
no,
you.
no, go.
This is actually something we're going to be talking about a lot today, is we're going to say things like E minus, and that means E day minus however many days. So it's however many days before the election. So sometimes we get sort of caught up in our own shorthand over here. So 43 days before election day is what we're talking about here.
So if it's 43 days before election day, then, and we've got voters have a month to vote by mail. I mean, they can't vote that entire time by mail, but you know what I mean? The timeline requires that the ballots be mailed to voters like right around then, right? So does that functionally, does that mean that the clerk's office ends up having like a week or even a little less than to do the translation piece and all of that kind of stuff when Tabor notices come from the budget management office?
I love all of these questions, and we are going to address all of them when we get to the part where we actually pull out this timeline.
Yes.
So
Awesome. Okay, I just wasn't sure and hadn't been able to see the PowerPoint presentation, so I didn't know if it was coming up or not, but really
it
appreciate that
absolutely
clarification.
is. Thank you. It's you are dead on.
Awesome.
Exactly the kind of questions that we're going to be talking about. So thank you for that.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Councilwoman Black.
I lowered my hand. I was just going to ask Sky to clarify that about the Tabor notices. Thanks.
Yeah, and that should read from, so I, that's my bad on the typo. So why don't we kind of move forward there? I think folks want to be able to see this timeline, and that's exactly right. What we usually consider those 43 days, you'll see the E minus. E minus is election day, right? So next slide. So on cue is the introduction to our ballot timelines. If you want to move forward. And if you can see that, I want to be able to make sure that in your screen, if there's something you cannot read, let us know, and we will we'll try to blow it up. It is blown up, but make sure on your screen you can go full if you want to see it closer. So what you see here are three timelines: the initiative, candidate, and information booklet timeline. So one timeline regarding those three tracks, right? And you'll see that that election day, last day to vote, right? And then you'll see the E minus 30, E minus 60, 90, and so forth. And those are the days until. So when we say E minus something, it's days until election day. Now, I do want to have my staff chime in on this one as well too. This is the timeline that we had talked about in the past, and kind of trying to fit everything that we possibly can in terms of those timelines that we talk about with initiatives, candidates, and also the information booklet. Know that these timelines also fit in a larger universe. It's a smaller mess of timelines in a larger mess of timelines that we have to be mindful of and in compliance for with any given election. So you'll see that, things like our logic and accuracy test, right? Our election plan, everything from, doing our cure deadlines and everything else. Like you'll start seeing that those things exist in a bigger universe, right? So I think, not every single timeline that we have to abide by is on this particular slide, but you'll see that when it comes to these three topics, that's the best of our ability to be able to put that together. Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thanks. Apologies. Just one more clarifying question. When we are looking at E minus whatever, is that business days or is that days? just because it makes a difference, right? Unless, I mean, I understand that right now you're all working 7 days a week during that time. But just wondering if, as we are considering these timeline dates and what we might do to propose some solutions, are we looking at business days here, or are we looking at actual just physical days?
We're looking at days.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Because of the fact that you can vote on Saturday and Sunday, because you just put your ballot in the box. So,
Yes, but this, I'm asking about the stuff that's ahead of time, right? Before the ballots go out, are we, considering Saturday and Sunday before ballots go out, days that we're measuring that this work is needing to be done in the clerk's office? That's what I'm wondering.
yes. The answer is yes. Dina, I don't know if Dina, Roger, I don't know if you wanted to add on to that. If I'm missing something. There are some timelines that aren't, but I don't think those are what's right here in front of you.
It's calendar days. The computation of time does call for some work days, but for the timeline, we're working with calendar days.
So Dina, I guess this question is for you then in terms of follow-up. Would the clerk's office staff who's doing this work propose that we change that to be calendar or to be business days versus calendar days, or clarify that in some way when we're talking about this? I'm just wondering from, the staff perspective, as we're talking about making these changes, does it make sense to then propose business days, and would that change even then some other potential options or solutions?
I think that we've not had that discussion about changing business days to calendar days. There's always a computation of time period that I'm familiar with where we're describing whether weekends and holidays and things are counting. So, and Audrey, feel free to please jump in, but when we've been discussing possible changes to the timeline, we've been discussing changes in calendar days. And part of that probably is once we are in that E-90 period, we're mostly working every calendar day anyway to build up to the election. So I do believe that we're just looking at, if we are making changes to the timelines, that it would be in calendar days as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to add one quick thing there is that using the calendar days helps us line up with things that are like in state code or the charter or in the Constitution. But there have been places where we do have, I think it's like, 3 full working days is something that we'll see in the code somewhere. So every once in a while we'll switch to that, and I'll try and point those out as we go. If there's any of those that pop up, I think I can think of like one. But it is a good point that the E- is just pure calendar days. So we know exactly where we are on our sort of city and county timeline, but also on the state timeline.
And I just want to let the panelists know, so you should have a PDF copy of these timelines as well too. And if you don't, we can send that to you. And what we want to be able to do is, today is, talk about any 3 out of the many timelines that we as elections officials have to adhere to. And that's 3 of these that are here. But know that it's important to know that we're not including campaign finance or any other administrative timelines. It's important to know that they are out there in this universe, and we work very hard to adhere to them all. And we do every single cycle, and we do that very diligently. So I want to make sure that folks know that this doesn't exist on its own. One policy change here, and all the changes that we look at have to adhere to another set of timelines that are part of the administrative function, especially if it is not in a municipal, right? So that's that part. Ms. Goldman, your hand is up.
So I had some questions about a different part of this timeline. I was looking at the candidate information and the timelines, and I'm guessing hopefully what you want to do is you want to create a timeline that works so that you're not jammed up doing all kinds of things at the same time. So let me ask you a couple questions, and then I think it'll be pretty clear why I'm asking these questions. First of all, in Denver, how many signatures are required on nomination petitions for candidates for office?
For candidate for office, it depends on what office you're running for.
Okay,
And correct me if I'm wrong, Dina, but it is 100 for the district and 300 for citywide.
okay.
I don't think that's changed in quite a while.
Okay, okay. It seems to me that if there was a way to complete the candidate nomination process, both the the signature gathering process, the withdrawal process, the amendment process, and then I had a question about the write-in. If that could be done somehow prior to that E-60, then that's one thing that you don't have to deal with when you're dealing with your MIB and the UOCAVA, getting the ballots out and the Tabor comments and all that kind of thing. So I was very curious as to, and I realized that, for district-wide, 300 is more than any other municipality. But I know, for example, in the city of Aurora, where I worked, the mayor and the council members, had to get 100 signatures that at large, that type of thing.
And I want to clarify, if I may, Ms. Goldman, so forgive me for the interruption. 300, 100 if you're a district council race, and then 300 if it's citywide.
Right, and it was the same at large, and it was 100. So 300 is a lot more. But I also assume that people who run district-wide or for mayor have people who help them get the signatures. So you've got multiple petitions going out at the same time. So I'm just wondering if anybody has considered shortening the time frame for collecting signatures so that all the nomination activities could take place, because it says here that the ballot content is certified E-60, but that's not exactly true, because what you haven't certified is the candidate piece of that. And so when I look at all the other things that have to take place between E-60 and E-30, if there was a way to consider shortening this and moving everything prior to 60, I know it's a big change. I know Denver's different, but it might help alleviate some of the stress of having to do multiple types of things all at the same time.
I appreciate that. And let me move us to the next slide so that we can talk about that on that timeline. So we've broken this out. So this is your municipal candidate timeline. And I swear everybody on the panel and in the public, I did not pay Karen Goldman to do that so that we can actually move it forward. But I do know that we have another couple of questions, including my fellow co-chair of this committee, Councilman Black.
Before Karen said all that, I wasn't aware that we had an issue with the timeline for candidates. When we're talking about the ballot information booklet, I thought it was more about the time to do any sort of fiscal or other analysis and to look at the pros and cons statements. I wasn't aware that the candidate timeline was impacting that. So if I'm wrong, please correct me.
What we'd like to do is, because it deals with the different kind of petition processes, the verification, and then how we administer those processes, we wanted to have them side by side and look at them together so that people have an understanding of those three different types of timelines that we want to kind of go through. I absolutely understand what you're saying, Councilman, and I want to take the time right now just to really kind of go through the goal of the discussion today. And it's not necessarily to find some of the solutions, although we have a few to recommend for this, but also to kind of show and demonstrate the timeline in which these proposals and which these proposed changes, perhaps if any, how they fit into that timeline. So we kind of wanted to go through this, but we wanted to look at those multiple timelines because, right out the gate, I just have to say that, our staff, a lot of people think of election staff as, we're only around from August to November. It's a year-round deal, and any kind of one of these petitions triggers staff, triggers people in terms of having to, put it out there, any resources necessary to meet these deadlines. So we want to look at how this works with the municipal candidate deadline. And also because if you remember, those of you who were part of this committee before and also members of the public, the voters approved us moving the election back to accommodate for the UACAVA deadline, that 45-day deadline, the E-minus 45-day deadline, and our runoffs that we were absolutely out of compliance with. So know that, you know, it's for this committee to understand more about the timelines and the issues that we face when we're making these changes. But know that some of these issues are indeed complex, and we're, you know, doing the best we can, everything to simplify the conversations and have it ready for you so you can, you know, ask those questions. That's why our staff is at hand as well too. So I just want to make sure that, you know, Director Dawson and Director Klein, and also our staff, Ben, our compliance administrator, just primary job is to make sure that we're compliant with these different timelines and laws, can chime in on that too. So questions on this particular timeline? I move on to the next one. Councilwoman, your hand is still up. I wanted to.
Clerk, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
The next, I just wanted to point out that Karen beat us all to the punch for sure. And we're about to, I mean, I love it. This is the best. I love that people are anticipating where we're going. This is so good. And so the next couple slides are going to be the couple places where we feel like we do have some recommendations for fixing. And then we're going to sort of wade into some of the deeper stuff. And especially a note to Councilwoman Black that the municipal information booklet is the last one that we're going to cover, because it's very complex, it's very tight, and we want to leave some space and some room to work through that. So we wanted to bring back the recommendations that we had from been working on from the last meeting, and then work through some of our easier things and then get into the hard one. So it's going to come back around here in a couple minutes.
Yeah. So Ms. Goldman, I'd like to move to the next slide. Okay, there we go. Ms. Goldman, do you have a question on the previous slide?
I just was curious about the deadline for the write-in candidates. And I mean, as long as, you know, again, it's sort of in line with my comments from before about making some changes. And I wonder if that could somehow be aligned with the withdrawal deadline. That's what they do in state statute, and it really does kind of make sense, but you know, it's probably low on the totem pole, but I did want to mention that.
Audrey,
Karen, you're hired. Because that's the next slide.
Mhm.
Okay.
So
You have to
no, you're doing
understand,
a wonderful job.
I'm currently in the throes of all these statutory town elections that are going to occur in 3 weeks, trying to keep people from, leaping off the ledges and trying to get everything happen. So
Just
I'm very, very focused on that.
Spectacular work. You are, you're just, we're going to get to it on the very next slide. And if we can come to an agreement on there, we will make Dina Dawson very, very happy.
Okay, thank you very
Yes.
much.
So timeline issues, and this is, in part of what we're talking about. The municipal candidate timeline. So the charter states that the verified candidate petitions must be filed by and their nominations accepted at least 55 days before the election. The problem with that is ballot certification is set at 60 days before the election in order to mail ballots to our UACAVA, which is our overseas and military voters, by the deadline of 45 days before the election. The solution to that in terms of staff, and Audrey, I don't know if you had your hand up if you want to chime in on it as well, to just go jump in. But that solution is that charter amendment and ordinance to move this to 75 days so that we allow for time to design, proof, and to certify ballots. And remember that these are also the need for us to be able to translate all that as well too, and then proof it. There's been a lot of, when those deadlines start getting shorter and shorter, what folks don't see behind the scenes is all of us proofing, and we have a whole team that just goes through and goes through and goes through to make sure that that's the case. I knock on wood at one of these runoffs one day, something's not in the right place, or a candidate's not in the right place, or something's wrong. And remember that each precinct that we have is a different ballot style. So it's that times the number of precincts. So the discussion point that we want to have with this particular one, if a candidate nomination is pushed back, committee, do we also push the date for petition pickup by 15 days as well? And I don't know, Director Dawson, if you want to kind of chime in on that from the administrative side or not, and kind of go into a little bit more detail if you want, please feel free to do that, or
I'm okay for now, clerk, and then I'll answer questions if folks
Okay.
have them.
So that's a question for the panel to consider, right? A discussion point. Councilman Flynn.
Hey, yeah, thank you, Clerk Lopez. Yes, what is the current time frame for candidate petitioning? How many days is that?
It's 55.
It's in February right now, isn't it?
55.
I'm sorry, 55?
It's 55 days currently, yes.
The 55 days is the last day to be verified and accept a nomination. The petitions are picked up at, somebody catch me if I'm wrong on this one, it's 91 days before the election. And what we want to discuss is, obviously we don't want to limit any candidate's access to the ballot. That is not the goal here. What the goal here is to make sure that the administration of the election goes well. So
Right.
we are asking if anyone feels strongly about sort of moving that timeline a little bit as well. But we want to be clear that now we're going to hear this as a theme today, is that when we're talking about April municipals, the timeline actually starts to bleed into the prior year. So if we're
Yes.
talking April 2023, and we move this, I believe, it is, sorry, this math has been very hard on my brain, but I believe that would put petition pickups somewhere at the end of December.
Okay,
Which
my
would be
recollection was I'm sorry, Audrey, to interrupt.
No, please,
Were you
please.
finished?
Mhm.
Okay. My recollection was that we picked up petitions sometime around the first week of February
Exactly.
for the May election. So would that not be the first week in January?
It would be the first week in January, but if we added,
But if you
we
added the
moved
15,
that 15 days, it would kind of
Right.
scooch it over into December.
got it. Okay. That would, I think I would advocate adding that extra time.
Okay.
But
Thank
I'd
you.
be interested in hearing what other folks think. Of course, that would put it back into like the week before Christmas. So there's not going to be a whole lot of door knocking and petitioning going on during the holiday week. So that's something to consider.
Mhm.
I mean, you could actually take advantage of the fact there's a whole bunch of people in a household.
Yeah, but they're all from out of town, Paul. I'd love to get rid of them. Actually, I could give them a petition, ask them to go circulate it for me. But yeah, you're right. And I think Ian Tafoya in the chat had mentioned the same thing. It's tough around the holidays to do that.
But know that they'd be available for pickup.
Yes, correct.
That's the good thing. And also as well too, you got to consider time off and availability. And, we operate under normal business hours. So.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay.
I think it's only fair to take the same static, rigid time frame that we had for the May election, and by moving it to April, everything else should be moved back by a month also.
So am I getting that as a yes, would be helpful by 15 days?
Mhm.
Okay. Ms. Goldman.
Just to give some timing perspective, the statutory town elections are in April, first week, Tuesday in April of odd numbered years. The petitions are picked up 91 days, and that is always the first week in January. So by you adding, having 75 days and 70 instead of 71 days to turn it in, you're really right around the end of December. And probably somewhere closer to New Year's than Christmas.
Most likely. Okay. Are there any other questions, input on that particular point? Okay. I'm hearing an affirmative.
Yeah, Paul, can I ask, pardon me, Clerk Lopez, can I ask just a little confusion on the current charter language? Nominations accepted at least 55 days before the election, but we had to certify the ballot 60 days before the election. How did that, in order to mail to overseas and military, how did that work?
Let me go to the,
Because that's not possible, is it?
It's barely possible because it's an administrative challenge. The 60 days is set in state statute. And I think Dina can speak a little bit more to that. I see her as.
Right. Okay.
I mean, truthfully, we've been able to scooge out a little bit. And Audrey, I think I borrowed your word. I think I heard you said scooge earlier. So we've been able to eke through with the certification and working with the vendor to do all of the proofing and the tight turnaround, which is why we're asking. The 55 deadline was actually the deadline to file the acceptance and the petition. So someone could come in on that 55th day with their petition, and then we still have to go through the verification process to make sure that there's enough signatures to put the person on the ballot. So by pushing it out to 75 days, that allows time for us to verify the petitions and have that time to be able to have everything lined up for that 60-day ballot certification and preparing the ballots.
yeah. Okay. Does that answer your question, Councilman?
Yeah.
Or just your concern? Okay. So I am seeing, and then Councilman Black had chimed in as well. So I am seeing that general support for more time. I think it does, allow for it to be, handled administratively in a timely fashion, as well as give folks who are running for office that extra little addition in time as well too. So the next one is Denver Revised Municipal Code 15.1 states that any candidate who has been nominated may not later than 48 days before the election withdraw, and no name so withdrawn shall be placed upon the ballot. Here's the problem. If a candidate were to withdraw at E minus 48, so 48 days before the election, the last day to vote, the elections division would be required to halt ballot printing, redesign, and resend all UOCAVA ballots. The solution for us is an ordinance change to move this up to E minus 60 to allow candidates to withdraw, but also to meet ballot certification deadlines. And the other part here is, and I think the discussion here is, if you remember, part of that is having to be able for us to have that ample time, but also administratively, everything from our ballots to our envelopes to the content, not only is just edited, but we have to order times 507,000. So it's a heck of a lift, and it's also something that I think, administratively, would help create a solution for, and address. So I don't know if Dina, Director Dawson, if you wanted to chime in on that one, if I didn't add any other detail that you wanted to add.
No, that's it exactly. I mean, you can clearly see that the E minus 48 is 3 days currently before UOCAVA ballots. And it takes weeks to proof and create ballots. So the timeline is just too tight. So if we're able to move the filing deadline or the acceptance deadline to 75, that allows someone time to determine if they want to withdraw. So we're just kind of the trickle down. If we change one, here are the others that we'd like to change as well.
Perfect. I'm looking at the panel. Panel, do you have any questions, comments, or questions on this particular solution? We're good? Okay, cool. Timeline issues. Here's the other one. Denver Revised Municipal Code 1510 states that no no write-in vote for any office shall be counted unless the candidate has filed an affidavit at least 15 days before the election. That problem causes a couple administrative issues. It requires that we take up valuable ballot space to include a write-in space for every contest, and two, it creates administrative delays during ballot processing, because every write-in needs to be accounted for up until the E-15 deadline in case a candidate files. And remember, for us, prime real estate for us is how long ballots are, right? The less cards that we get to, the less space that we have to create on a ballot, the least number, the less, let me say this differently. The least amount of cards, the easier it is for us to be able to administer. The faster it is for us to be able to process results, and also it's less expensive, right? So it is more efficient when we have a 2-card ballot or a 1-card ballot versus a 3-card or a 4-card ballot, right? So when you think of that space, think of it that way as well too, okay? The solution is that we would line up the write-in deadline with the regular candidate deadline at least 60 days to save ballot space and streamline ballot processing. Now, one of the discussion points here is maybe we need to look at vacancy procedures in order to ensure that there's no gaps. Should there be someone that withdraws or otherwise become unable to stand for election, sorry. Anything to add, team? Panel?
Yeah, it sounds a little odd to have the same deadline for an actual filing by a candidate, whether that person is getting their name on the ballot, and then the same deadline for a write-in. Typically, a write-in candidate, if you wanted to run, you would have filed by that, that deadline, was it 55 days before the election, 60 days before the election. To have that be the same deadline to also be a write-in candidate seems rather odd. What happened, my memory is a little fuzzy on 2011, but when Carla Madison passed away,
That's what I was going to bring up.
Yeah, there were like 40 some write-in candidates, weren't they? David Broadwell, you probably have a very clear memory of this, so let me turn it over to you. And how would a change like this have impacted that 2011 District 8 race?
Well, first of all, Kevin, let me defer if anybody else wants to address that first. But yes, that's why I raised my hand, to explain exactly the type of situation for which you need to have a later date for write-in candidates to weigh in. And that was a perfect example where a candidate who met the nomination deadline and so forth, unfortunately in her case, she died, but others might withdraw. And so you might need the opportunity for people, even at a later date, to say, I'm willing to do it as a write-in candidate. Ballots have gone out, my name's not on there, but because of these other circumstances, you need the safety valve of having a write-in procedure. And if you make the deadline for write-in, raise your hand to be a write-in, the same as nominating, it blows away that whole concept. So I don't see how this idea flies at all. And everybody else around the state in municipalities, they have exactly what I described, an opportunity for people to submit an affidavit of willingness to accept as a write-in at a much later date than the nominating petitions would normally be due. But you're right, Kevin, your memory is correct that there was a lot of scrambling in those days leading up to that election in terms of the number of write-in candidates who had to submit an affidavit to indicate their willingness to serve if elected. And as you've just said, there were a bunch of them, 25 or so.
Yeah, and then Ms. Stewart, Sky Stewart, wanted to chime in?
I just was gonna call on David and say the same things that Councilman Flynn and David just said. So I just popped in the chat that I agree with both of them. I think inherently the thought behind a write-in requires that it have a later deadline, and was going to ask David to recount the Carla Madison example. So I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to clarify something that I know that we had a little bit of confusion on the presentation on this particular slide is 60 days is ballot cert and candidate withdrawal. And, you know, I think for us, that's the kind of discussion that we wanted to try. I mean, this is exactly what we wanted to do, is put these all in a timeline so that we can actually look at these and see how they line up. So Audrey, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, I think some of the administrative questions that we have around this one, we're certainly not opposed to, finding other solutions that are not this. But what this causes is that when we start sending ballots at 45 days and most of them at sort of 21, 22 days, those ballots are coming in for several days. And we're having, and when I say we, I mean Dina and her team, the intrepid explorers of ballot processing, they're dealing with the administrative issues that write-ins create. And it is fairly extensive. And so, Dina, can I tag you in to talk us through like what that looks like?
Sure. Yeah, happy to jump in. And just to clarify, I think right now the deadline we're looking at for write-ins is 15 days after the proposed deadline for the acceptance of nomination petitions. So we're moving that to 75 days. We're saying at 60 days, we're creating the ballots, creating the ballot content. So ideally that's 15 days after the acceptance deadline. So, and also I believe that with statewide write-in candidates, it's 67 days, which is 7 days after, 7 days before. But when there is a write-in candidate, we will only count votes for those who have filed that affidavit with us to certify themselves as a write-in candidate. So then we have a list of, the write-ins that have filed that affidavit with us. And so in order to accommodate the current process, we have to assume there's going to be a write-in for every race. And so then folks, even if there are no write-ins for those races, folks are going to utilize that line and write in Mickey Mouse or whomever they want, but it still requires that keen review of each of them to make sure. So what we were looking for is an opportunity, if possible, is just to remove the write-in on every single one, just in the case that there was going to be somebody that filed an affidavit to be a write-in.
Yeah.
No.
And it's a question of efficiency, right? And I think, as we run the election, especially with the growing number of voters in the city, now at 507,000, 507,000. Think of that as, literally it could be a 3 or 4 card ballot, right? And I'm knocking on wood, and I know my staff's going to kill me for actually triggering that, but it could be. And so that you're looking at, longer processing times. It adds to it, but it also adds to the cost as well too, as we continue to grow. It is a policy question that we want to have, and that's why we want to look at that and have those discussions here, so we can get some guidance in terms of how we move forward based on the values of what we're having the committee consider. Councilman Flynn.
Yeah, thank you, Clerk Lopez. Dina, maybe you could clarify for me, unless there is a filed affidavit of a write-in candidate, we don't bother looking at those races where someone might have written in Mickey Mouse, correct? We don't even look at them.
Yes, but if there's a write-in line on every single municipal race that appears on that ballot, then to take the election judges and say, you don't have to pay attention to write-ins on this one, but you do have to pay attention to all of the write-ins in this one, and we need to outstack those so that we can sort them separately. So if we're looking at a way to make it more efficient, it would be to move the write-in deadline to before ballots are created and printed.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing though then is, first of all, I would want to keep the write-in line there for each race, no matter what. I don't think we can set the deadline for a write-in before you have to print the ballots and mail them. And Carla Madison is a demonstration of that. But more importantly, I think the American people, they're so used to having that line there. If we don't give them the option, I think that would cause an uproar. The other aspect of it is, let me understand how the machinery works. If someone fills in the little dot where the write-in space is, our counting machines know that, right? So they know that there were 200 ballots that went through from this precinct and they had that dot filled in. But if we know that there was no write-in for that, there was no affidavit for a candidate for the write-in, we don't have to look at them. Even if they wrote in a serious candidate, that person didn't file an affidavit, so it doesn't matter. They can't be counted because they didn't comply with our code. But what you're saying is, in those races where there was an affidavit, we still have to go through by hand every ballot, or can we put them through the machines again and have them segregate the ballots that have the write-in line filled in?
Just to clarify that deconstruction process where we're reviewing and preparing ballots to go through the tabulation machines, yes, the tabulation machines do have some settings where we can say, we're looking for this or ignore that. We want to review these. But as part of the preparation of our election judges, as they're preparing those ballots to be tabulated, they're going to do a review to make sure that the voter's intent is going to be clearly recorded. So there's always going to be a personal review and pre-preparation of those ballots as they're going through the machine.
Okay.
Ben, I saw you had your hand up earlier, and I was referring to state statute requiring write-ins to be 67 days before an election for state races. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Dina. The state is a little bit different because the fact that we're dealing with partisan elections at the state level, and therefore there is an entire statutory scheme around filling vacancies between the time of ballot certification and the election. So that's a little bit different, but I did want to point out that obviously this is a policy choice around the efficiency of the ballot, the length of the ballot, and those types of things with regard to moving that write-in timeline closer to ballot certification, which I know is the case for at least statutory municipalities in the state. And when you do that, you would be making a policy decision that in the rare case that you have a candidate who is unopposed in a race, so there's not a second candidate on the ballot for that same race, and that candidate withdraws or dies or something else happens, then you would move to the existing vacancy process within Denver's code. And so I think that there is, I completely understand the arguments around why write-in is pushed so close to election day at that 15 days. It does make some sense, but it's not the only way that you can go, right? There is a vacancy process for every officer who's elected within the city. And in the rare circumstance, for example, in 2011, when that happened, you can follow that vacancy process. So, at the end of the day, it's a policy decision, something for this group to consider. But I do think that there's more than one avenue to resolve this issue.
And Ben, I'm glad you said that, because I think, it is also a question of this panel is, regardless of what the outcome was, right? The outcome being of a colleague that joined us on the council, was the process fair enough? Did the process allow on that kind of blitz of write-in candidates? Was it a process that should have triggered a special election? Especially for folks in that particular council district, should they have had more time and the opportunity to discuss the dialogue and have that special election rather than have a kind of crapshoot at the end of write-in candidates, right? Now, is that something that this panel, I'd like to hear some of the thoughts on that. I haven't been on the council and served on the council during the time that happened, and having to say bye to a colleague who passed, as she was running unopposed, and then to see that play out was very rare. And I think at some point, Mr. Broadwell, I think we discussed it on council as well too, in terms of what happens, right? And so I think part of the discussion that was hanging fire, at least I remember at the time, and some of the values were like, well, it's kind of too late now, but in the future, is this something that we should fix? Is this something that we should address? And I think, that is coming to a discussion point now of the group. I mean, it is one, I think, maybe moving the timeline might be a little bit different. So that's one of the discussions that are happening also too, but is there anywhere in the process, and maybe it's the way we process it, that leads to that efficiency as well too. So I don't know if that made any sense to some of the folks who hadn't been following it, but. I was just pausing so that folks can chime in, but I don't know if there's anything to add there. Councilman Flynn, Mr. Tafoya, Ian Tafoya, your hand's up.
Well, I'm just curious about what it would really cost for you to do a precinct special election in that case. I did live in the district at that time.
Mhm. Well, it depends, right? I think it depends on the number of voters that we had at that particular time in the district, and then I know that has increased. Dina, I think we would have to look at the number of voters in that particular district, and then the cost per voter has increased. The cost per voter has increased this last time around, especially now.
Yeah. I don't know, but we can look
take a
to
look at
see and
that.
provide that information.
Yeah. But
Not
that's
cheap. It's not going to be cheap.
That's absolutely the case. Ian, did you want to, I don't know if there's anything you also wanted to add there. I know that you were a candidate. Were you not in that? Or
No,
not?
I ran the next election actually.
Okay, that's right.
But I remember getting like 40 flyers on my door.
Yeah.
And I knew Carla Madison, and it was, I think, quite shocking. I do think it would have been interesting to let the people to be vetted, but again, I don't know what the difference in the cost would be for you to include the write-in.
Yeah.
And then that.
Yeah. And it's a very rare occasion, but these are things that we have to account for, right? And with those timelines as well too. So I don't know if we have this is something that we're probably going to have to go back to the drawing board and look at. And just if there's, like I said, if there's anything that pops to mind, please hit us up. Let's go to the next slide if we can. So we're going to move on to the initiated ordinance timeline. So the initiative and charter amendment timeline. This is something that we put together, and I have to definitely give a shout out for these to our comms team who did a really good job. Amelia, Cass, Alton, working with our, within our elections division to kind of put this together as well. And I know this is, Amelia, she's on here, but she did such a great job, and I wanted just to publicly acknowledge that and putting this together. We haven't had a timeline like this, for review in terms of the public that's put together like this, and I think it's quite a heck of a feat. The biggest issues around the fact that this timeline it intersects with the April timeline, and that's why we wanted to kind of put this into perspective with our municipal timeline as well, and also because of the fact that we did ask voters to change the date and moving it to April. So it creates a really heavy lift for us, but this is, I wanted to kind of pause right there and invite staff to kind of chime in from the get-go on this particular timeline and things that you want to make note of for the panel.
I just dropped something in the chat there. I think one of the points that we'd like to get across is we didn't want to put it on here to sort of confuse anyone, but if we're imagining this election day here as the upcoming November election, that December 5th, which is just going to be after the election, it's going to be shortly after canvas, I believe, is also E-Day minus 120 for the April election. So this timeline overlaps itself now. And we just really want to be sure that we're communicating through how that can add complexity. So when we're talking about things like signature verification, which I'll probably let Dina get into here in a minute before I get over my skis, the timelines become compressed. And this is not one of the areas where I think we're really coming with any sort of recommendations or anything, but we want the committee to understand that when we start talking about other things around signatures for petitions, that we will be working on a timeline that is directly after Election Day and going through about the end of December for a ballot initiative to be placed on the April ballot. And that puts a lot of stress on the elections team, the voter services in particular. And so I'll kick that to Dina to sort of give us some details.
Audrey, I'm not sure if there's any questions right off the bat related to this petition process. And pardon my face right in the screen, but I'm trying to review the timeline and it's pretty tiny on my screen. So as we're looking, this created such a struggle in the last election cycle for us because as the clerk mentioned in our very first meeting, we had up to 9 petitions that were scheduled to be filed at that 120-day deadline with hopes of being found sufficient and appearing on the November election. And currently we have the 25-day signature verification and hold period. And so that 25-day period doesn't matter how many petitions are filed. We have 25 days to do the verification of the entire petition. So if there were 8 or 9 petitions all scheduled to be filed on the same day, it's impossible to get them all done within 25 days. And again, it's 25 calendar days, so it includes weekends, holidays, and most of our staff did work through 4th of July weekend to be able to get the petitions done. But the verification of the petitions is a very hands-on manual process currently. When the petitions come in, I mean, it sometimes can take 2 to 3 hours just to receive the petitions in because we're going through and numbering each petition section that comes in. So just the receipt time, just scheduling time for folks to come in and file those petitions and allowing enough time for us to do an initial review and to number each of the petitions, provide the receipt and that type of information. Each of the petitioners committees is required to file a list of all of their circulators and their notaries. And then we then take that information, if it was provided, and enter it into the statewide voter registration system. And we have to do verify that every single person that is the notary is valid notary and that they were valid at the time of signing. And we have to review every single notary page to make sure that the circular affidavit was up to date and accurate and complete. So just the pre-processing and review of those petitions takes several days and several people. And then after that piece, we've got to go through and review every single line to make sure that there are enough qualified signature lines to even allow us to do the verification. You needed 9184. We've got to go through and review every single line to see if it's a qualified line that we would be able to process. And as I mentioned, I think the 9184 number, folks were trying to get double those numbers to make sure that they received enough. So the team was looking at between 18 and 20,000 signatures for each petition. We do have to verify or review every single signature that was submitted. That's a qualified line. And we're verifying the signature that they lived at the address that they were at when they signed the petition. So it's really a very manual process that currently would be impossible to be able to conduct more than just a few petitions at a time. We ended up having, I think, some folks came in early, which helped us space it out, which was great. So we were able to get through it. But I do believe that we ended up having 4 petitions all filed on that very last day. One withdrew, a couple filed early. And so we had to bring in about 40 election workers. We had to find space for everyone to work. We had to get them all set up. We had to train everybody. And we were able to like just kind of trudge through and get those signatures verified. But it's hard to kind of demonstrate the manual process and all of the work that goes into those. But we really need to find a solution with signatures, and keeping in mind there's discussion about the threshold for signatures that might change as well. Audrey, I see your hand up.
Yeah, we're kind of in the chat over here, and I think the term verification is
Oh.
getting a little
Yeah.
conflated.
Oh,
I was wondering if you could walk us through the difference between how to verify a signature on like a ballot and the difference that you would of the process you're running on a petition.
okay. So we are verifying signatures on petitions as well. So when we're verifying, we are looking, there's multiple reasons that a petition signature could be rejected. But there are certain requirements. You have to be living at the address that you've signed the petition on the date that you've signed it. And we are verifying signatures. We are making sure that the signature matches. We have had multiple petition sections where there were fraudulent signatures. So we are comparing the signature. We are doing the validity check to make sure that you're a registered voter at the time that you signed at the address that you were at. We're also looking for if there was a witness signature or somebody helped you. So there's those pieces. Did that help that clear that up? I'm sorry, I wasn't following along in the chat.
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the takeaways here is when you look at the timeline, I want to draw everybody's attention to that timeline. And one of the biggest issues that we have is that this timeline does intersect the April and November, like end to end, from the end of the start, with the verification of signatures, is that it creates a period right around, the beginning of November, right after election day, when we are still accepting curable ballots in some cases, and we're still haven't gone through canvas yet. We're still verifying signatures. We're still wrapping up the November election. The April election all of a sudden starts, right? And so we have staff that are out there downstairs, full staff and election judges that are working on closing out that election, going into RLA with a risk limiting audit, getting our UACAVAs back in, and then UACAVAs back in, RLA, and then going to canvas, which is kind of closing out that election, right? At the same time, our voter services staff are in, and this is the same people, and with another set of election judges, are starting to do the verification process on signatures and petitions. So it is a heavy backlog. And primarily for what we call our voter services department, that's in the elections division. And it's a big shift for hiring, for implementing signature verification staff, while trying to still close out that November general election. So these are really, really important to keep in mind as we start to talk about things like increasing signature thresholds, or or any changes to that process in these next few meetings that we're going to have, and know that the council referred ordinance date is the same as ballots for certification. The election division really appreciates when that is not hit, but also has its own issues with that as well. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear and understood, that whole kind of back end and start is going to be a pretty heavy lift, right? So Audrey, I don't know if you wanted to chime in on that. I could see your hand up.
Oh yeah, I think you really hit it. Those are a lot of the things that we just wanted to make sure that this committee was aware of as we head into next conversations. So I think we're mostly done on this one, but I see Ben's hand up. Yes. I love hearing from Ben. Ben, what's going on? What do you got?
I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, just real quick, because I'm watching the chat here. I just wanted to shoot out a couple of citations with regard to signature verification for candidate petitions, for actual verification of the signature in the same manner that it's done on ballot return envelopes. That's rule 4.4.3 of the clerk and recorder's election rules. That same language is also in rule at 5.8.3 for verification of signatures on initiative petitions in the city. So those are the two citations that we use in order to conduct that signature verification.
Thank you for that. And Ben, your photo, your at rest photo, when your camera's not off, is so high resolution. I thought it was going to start speaking. I was like, God. I didn't notice that before. So why don't we move on to that next slide? And so here's what we wanted to kind
Okay,
of.
I think we can.
Yes.
I think we can honestly just like to skip over this one a little bit for the sake of time. It
Yeah,
kind of
okay.
gets a little
It
weedy.
goes to that, yeah.
And it doesn't actually, I don't think it'll actually add to this conversation, but we can maybe circle back at another time. I would like to get into the MIB to start talking about some of the juicy stuff.
I agree with that. And I think this is part of the conversation that we had. You're absolutely right. Part of the conversation that we had is signature verification.
Mhm.
Why don't we go over to the MIB then? So this is the MIB, the Municipal Information Booklet Tabor timeline. Now this gets a little sticky, and I think the biggest, problematic factor here is Tabor requirements, and the fact that we have to adhere to Tabor requirements, which are pretty hard to hit. We hit them, but like as we talked about earlier, getting comments from the public sooner so that we can ease the burden on staff. And being able to process and do translation, do design, do hit mailing deadlines in a way that doesn't rush us, in a way that we are able to actually manage, and we've done it. But as we start looking at changes to this process, we want to make sure that we keep those things in mind and those processes get in mind, because if that backlog gets worse, we're going to be forced to cut down on certain processes, which, I think, with things like this, we have to be absolutely diligent and basically cutting out Spanish translation, which we do not want to do because we are that Section 203 county. I think that, when looking at this particular timeline and looking at that information booklet, again, I want to emphasize that although we have the booklet online, we are printing it and sending it and mailing it out. And then those deadlines that, that make it the most difficult are those Tabor deadlines, and we cannot change those. Those are our state charter, right? Those are Tabor requirements. So I do want to have, questions from the panel on this one, comments from the panel, and Dina chime in. Dina is pretty solid on this. And I think, her and her team kind of looking through this Tabor timeline and what that takes to kind of build that in is pretty critical. So Councilwoman Black, Madam Co-Chair.
Thanks. So the everything that happens between 30 and 60 days, what of those are we able to change? And even if it is something in state statute, could we give it more time? Can we go further than the state, I guess is the question. But of all those 4 things you have in that box, which can be changed? How can they be changed?
That's an excellent question, ma'am. And I think there's 2 answers. There's everything's changeable, but also none of this is really changeable. So when you're talking about the larger like state deadlines, that really feels like the actual constriction. So like there's a chance that you could run like a ballot initiative to do that and things. But the other stuff that we're trying to zoom in on is in particular some of the things that you've brought up have sparked the idea of moving the municipal information booklet comments from E-50 and moving those over to 60. So that's kind of expanding that timeline for part of the booklet, not all of it, but these are things that would just be Denver centric and would give the staff a little bit more time for translation. That in particular is very important, and it takes time, and we don't want to rush that because then you get it wrong. So the earlier that we can start on some of the drafting and the proofing and design, that will free up a little bit of staff time. But it would be a little harder to move it any further past that, because we wouldn't actually know what's going to be on the ballot in theory. So that seems to be the one that jumps out most. And then we've also talked about taking the both pro and con pieces for sort of analysis and excuse me, the word is actually summarizing. Is that correct? So that would give us a little bit of breathing room, but most of these other ones are the state statute.
Yeah, and that, if I may add on to that, that's exactly as we start looking at adding more to that, more processes in that, it does require a little bit more time, especially if we're going to have to do summaries, and especially if we're waiting for that fiscal analysis and that timeline with that as well too, if it becomes part of it. But remember, it's also in the event that it depends also greatly on the if we're going to have a 1, 2, 3, or 4 card ballot, right? And depends on the outcome out of here as well too. So I think, the 1 card ballots those are gone. I think those days are over, right? So it just depends on the content and what we have to do with that content. Last time we had 9 measures on the ballot.
Is it possible to have word limits or space requirements so that you know how to lay it out? And then
Right now, that's the only thing that we
it.
can do. The only thing that we can do is make sure that there's not a F-bomb in there and limit the words down to 500. I don't know, folks, anybody else on chat? Councilwoman, is there anything there? I know this is something that Councilwoman Black and especially Councilwoman Black, is really looking at something that this being a great tool for voters, but also something that we really need to look at in a closer manner. And this is something that the value that I also share. However, I talked about the apples and apples earlier. We lack the same kind of, Denver lacks the same structure as what the state does in comparison with the state Blue Book, because they have their own independent office. That's a legislative review office that dedicates its resources and time to be able to do that and come up with that Blue Book. And they're independent, whereas, we could do that. We just do not have the resources for currently. And then you got to think about year round, what does that personnel do, right? Troy.
Thanks, Mr. Clerk. Councilwoman Black, I just wanted to offer some clarification to your question. That Tabor comments due E45, that's in the state constitution. So there's nothing we can do about that. The other deadlines are in our code, and we could move those around. We can adjust those. And just to answer your question about, what the relationship with state law, I mean, our code basically says we follow Title I, except for when we don't in this code. So this is our municipal information booklet is something that is in our code, and those other deadlines can be moved around, but we're stuck with that Tabor one because it comes from the state constitution.
And that's the most difficult thing we have to wrangle.
So the just for example, the info booklet comments, if it's in our code, we could move it to even earlier than 60 days. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
And the fiscal analysis too. Now, obviously that involves finance, and I don't want to get out ahead of what other deadlines or obligations they have in that time. I think this is often, it just happens to match up with budgeting. So, but yes, those deadlines are in our code and can be adjusted.
And if I may, I can actually, Councilwoman, you bring up a good point. So the only ballot initiatives that we don't know about in theory, or we might not know about at, say, E-61 would be council referred. Somebody, Troy, stop me if I'm wrong on this one, but those are the only ones that would actually, that have the ability to pop up at that time. So citizen initiatives have to be turned in and verified. There's a complicated deadline around sort of 120 days. So in theory, if council were to not put anything on the ballot at that deadline, if you wanted to move that deadline as well, you could, in theory, open this up more. Troy, did I get that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I would just say that there really is no deadline for council to refer something to the ballot in the code. It's just that council has that authority to refer something to the ballot, obviously. And then there's the ballot certification deadline. So what happens is council kind of tends to work up to that ballot certification. They have an election that they're gunning for, and they kind of work up to that ballot certification deadline to get that on there. So yeah, if there were a deadline, I think you could put that in code. I think you could potentially put it in council rules, something to that effect. But yeah, there is no hard deadline. It's just it kind of tends that council works up to that deadline, which is late August.
All right, thanks.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments around this timeline? And then in regards to the municipal information booklet? Staff, do you have anything to add on this one? Okay, so one of the, and I sound like a broken record for saying this, but it's literally the juggernaut here is the table requirements, right? And I think for us, that's going to be something that we always going to have to work around. But there are some things that we are able to, there's some low hanging fruit that we are able to address. And, this is something that is valuable, and I think still has that value. We still want to print it out and send it. And it's one of those things that we really have to accommodate a lot of different requirements in there. And this is something I want to address and just kind of preempt and put out there as well, is that, it goes back to our philosophy with democracy. I'd say, right? Philosophy of democracy here in Denver is that this model is very voter centric. So we want to be able to do is have every tool for voters to be able to utilize, and how they vote, how they can, for them to be able to cast their ballot, not how they vote, but how they vote in terms of that process and where to, right? Not for anything or anybody, right? I think it's just being able to empower voters with as many tools as possible to be able to do so. It is something that is of value. We're going to continue to analyze and look at solutions to some of the issues that we've encountered, right? Next slide, unless anybody has any. Okay, Mr. Broadwell, I saw something in the chat, but I don't know if you wanted to. I'm going to just give you the courtesy of calling on you if need be, in terms of clarification for state law, the ballot content. All right. So you see this timeline all together. In terms of the fiscal analysis for petitions, Councilman Black, I'm going to turn it to you.
Sky Stewart and I met with our chief financial officer to talk about fiscal analysis and what we could do to get it done earlier and possibly putting it on petitions. And so we talked about the logistics of some of that, and it would require, assigning staff to it, but it's a possibility. And we will talk about it more, because ultimately the goal for all of us is more information for voters. And so we will continue to talk about the possibility of the Department of Finance being able to do that. And we do have Allison here from the Department of Finance. I think, Allison, you're just observing today, but we will definitely keep that conversation going.
Did Allison want to chime in or?
Thank you. I have nothing additional to add. I will say that I think Steve Bond is also joining us on the call. He might be under my name from the budget office.
Hi, sorry about that. We had difficulty signing in, but yeah, so we did talk yesterday. Myself, I'm Steve Bond with Budget and Management with Sky Stewart, Councilwoman Black, and Brendan to discuss some of the pitfalls that we do encounter, timeline, ballot language, and things to that extent. And we are more than happy to look at our process to make sure that we meet the standards that this group decides to implement. So more to come on that. And if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
Thank you. Councilwoman Black, is there anything else?
No.
Okay. Mr. Alton Dillard. from
I
our-
just wanted to, hi, I'm Alton Dillard. I'm the communications manager for the Office of the Clerk and Recorder here. And I just also just wanted to shout out the Department of Finance for their work, especially this last time we had those 9 questions, because again, they are working under the current timeline. They've always done a good job of getting stuff to us on a tight turnaround. But we also wanted them to be part of this discussion so we can come up with some solutions to maybe make the turnarounds not quite so tight.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alton. The relationship between our office and the clerk is very strong, and we appreciate their work and working with us to get these numbers to them. But it would be nice if we did move everything. The further away it is from September 15th, which is the first draft to council for the upcoming budget, would be great. I would still check with my decision makers within my office for whatever recommendations are done. But further away from September 15th would allow us a little bit more capacity to look at these measures and make sure that we get them approved through the many agencies, the administration. So when we submit it to the clerk, everyone impacted and involved is on the same page.
Thank you. Ms. Klein, Director Klein.
Thank you. And Steve and Allison, I was just wondering if you could quickly run us through for the benefit of the people, what is the short version of the process for getting a fiscal analysis? What are you looking at? What are we talking about sort of practically to sort of enlighten myself, but also the public?
Sure. So first of all, we want to make sure our analysis does not persuade voters in either direction, right? We want to be as neutral as possible. When we receive the ballot language from Alton, we meet with the city attorney's office to make sure that our office fully understands what the language is telling us. It's different than what the intent of the language is, but what the language is telling us. Then we reach out to the agencies that could be impacted, working with them to identify what the financial impact would be. And of course, going back and forth with them to make sure that we have the most accurate financial data for us to start to make a projection on, correct? After we do that and we come to an agreement, I work with both Stephanie Adams and Brendan Hanlon from our office to review the information, for them to ask questions. Usually we go back out to the agencies with more questions, work on that. Then of course, before we sign off on it, we send it over to Sky and the administration, Sky Stewart and the mayor's office for her and team to take a look at it. And then once she receives it, makes some comments, we then one final time reach back out to the city attorney's office to make sure we're on the same page. Is it perfect? No, definitely not. There have been some pitfalls, and I will admit to that. But most of the time it works pretty smoothly. So as you can tell, we have a lot of agencies involved. So getting everybody on the same page and getting a draft that everyone agrees to does take a little time. But it has been done. And Alton and team has been very good to us to help us make sure that we make our deadlines.
Thank you. I think that was first of all a great explanation, but it was more work than I had anticipated. So thank you for that. It seems like a lot, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. I wanted to move on to the next part of our agenda in terms of, discussion of future agenda items. Councilwoman Black, I think this is, looking at what we wanted to do is kind of compile all this timeline for you to look at together. It's a lot of work to be able to do, but we were able to get it done and use as a resource. So in looking at, committee discussion on future agenda items, Councilwoman Black, please chime in, for our next committee meeting in terms of adding anything that we may have forgotten. But I think, for the next committee, we do want to have, a review and identify some topics for discussion, one of them being signature thresholds. And that is, signature thresholds for petitions, for candidates. And, we've been, my staff has been looking at, some analysis, some research in other cities and what other cities do and require, other cities that are like Denver, right? And then I'm looking at what those are. And for the next meeting, we will have that kind of discussion so that question can be addressed. And then a signature verification process and processes. And, I don't know if we'll have actually much to talk about at that point, but we're keeping it because the committee needs to know this, how difficult that is, but also, some of the models of signature verification, right? Random sampling versus every single signature, and what those thresholds are and how they both relate. So those are the kind of questions that we definitely want to have, and the discussion that we want to have, and the input that we want to have from the panel on those two topics. Councilman Black, is there anything that you wanted to add there, or is there anything else?
The topics that I identified initially, we have discussed, but I do want to think more on some of the things we talked about today.
Yeah.
I didn't see this presentation until 4 o'clock or 2:30 today. So I need to look at it some more and talk internally with our attorneys and other council members on it. So we'll do that in the next few weeks.
Thank you. And the other thing that I do want to let the panel know is that we are working on some draft ordinances for their review, and just to make sure that you have the ample time to be able to take a look at that as well too. Again, if you have any questions or anything else, please feel free to reach out to us. Folks who are watching in the public, please know that if there's something that you'd like to chime in on, please send us an email. We get that written comment. It's BAMC @denvergov.org. I don't know if there's any other questions this time. For the public comment period, we do not have anybody signed up for public comment at the moment. So panel, I don't know if there's anything else. Now that we have this time. Okay, we are at 4:10. What we will be doing is just giving you the gift of time. So with that, thank you, folks, for attending. Thank you, panel members, for again for your participation in this. We will be in touch, and folks, given that it is snowing outside and, the weather's getting colder. I want you to be able to drive home safely if you're out and about. With that, thank you. We don't have anything else. And you could also watch our previous meetings as well too. So the next meeting that we're going to have is going to be on April 21st from 2:30 to 4:30. And if you have any questions or comments, again, hit us up, bamc@denvergov.org, and watch our previous meetings.
Thank you.